He's here again. The younger one, Petra, maybe 19, wiping down the counter near the coffee urns, didn't look up when she said it. Just tilted her head toward the far corner. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, before 6. The other woman, older, stacking cups, glanced over once and went back to her work. How does he even get on base? He's not staff, look at him. In the corner, the old man in the olive jacket was unfolding a paper map. Not a phone, not a tablet, a road map, creased and soft as old cloth, that he spread carefully across the laminate table beside his coffee. He didn't look up, didn't look at anyone, just smoothed one corner down with his thumb and found a particular crease along the eastern edge, traced it once, slow, and went still. The older woman set down her cups. "I don't ask," she said. The younger one leaned in. "Who let him on base in the first place?" The older woman set down her cups. "I don't ask," she said. Walter wasn't listening. He never listened to rooms the way people assumed. He listened to rooms the way he'd been trained. Perimeter first, exit second, faces third. The two women behind the counter were not a threat. The door to the east corridor was propped open with a rubber wedge. Two officers at the far table were talking too quietly for the space between them. He noted it, filed it, returned to the map. It was a county road map, the kind gas stations used to sell for $2 before gas stations stopped selling things worth buying. The fold lines had gone soft. The paper along the eastern edge of the Pruitt property, 41 acres of river bottom, pasture and one stubborn ridge that never held water, had worn through completely at one crease, clean as a healed scar. He set his thumb along it. Didn't press, just rested. This was Margaret's part. She used to unfold it on the kitchen table before the coffee was even done, tracing the contour lines with one finger like she was reading Braille. She could find the low corner of the south field by feel alone by the last year. Said the land needed someone paying attention to it, not managing it, not surveying it, just paying attention, knowing it was there, knowing its shape. He'd asked her once if that actually helped the land. She'd looked at him the way she looked at things she didn't feel like explaining. Then she said, "Probably not, but it helps me." He understood that better now than he had at the time. She'd been gone 11 years. The map was older. He still drove out here on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings, same as always, because the cafeteria opened at 5:45, and he could be in the corner chair with his coffee before the base staff started arriving, and before the room got loud enough that he had to pay attention to all of it at once. The drive was 4 miles on the county road, and then another half-mile through the main gate, and the guard on the early shift knew his truck and lifted the barrier without a word, and Walter always gave a single nod through the windshield, the way he'd been doing it for 6 years without either of them deciding they were going to do that. The chair in the corner was the reason he came, not the corner itself, the angle. It put his left shoulder against the wall, both entry doors visible in one sweep, the coffee station and the east corridor accessible without standing. He'd sat that way in mess halls on 3 continents and at a kitchen table in a village outside Kandahar and in a safe house in Pristina with the heat off and a man breathing shallowly in the back room, and he'd sat that way in his own kitchen for 11 years after Margaret died, because old habits were honest things and he didn't see the point of pretending otherwise. He picked up the coffee. Black. The same blend the Navy had been buying from the same regional distributor since at least 1987 and probably earlier. He knew that without looking it up. He'd been drinking it since he was 22 years old, and it still tasted like early mornings that hadn't decided yet what they were going to be. He turned back to the map. The crease along the eastern boundary was where her finger had worn through the paper. Not his. He hadn't even noticed it happening. Then one morning she was gone, and he was sitting there alone, and he looked down, and the paper was thin as skin in that one spot, and he understood that the map had been keeping track of her all along, the way good things do. He set his thumb along it again. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the prop door, someone's boots clicked down the corridor and faded. He waited for the room to tell him something worth knowing. "Hey, Martinez, what's that patch on his jacket?" Danny Okafor kept her voice low. She was 23, 8 months into her first posting, and she had learned already that the cafeteria had its own hierarchy of regulars. The colonel who took the table by the window, the contractors who clustered near the coffee station, and talked too loud about nothing. And then this man in the corner, who came twice a week before the building officially opened, and who always seemed to have been there already, the way furniture was already there. Martinez glanced over and shrugged, went back to wiping the counter. Danny watched anyway. The old man hadn't moved in 11 minutes. She'd been watching the clock put in tasks. Not frozen, just still. There was a difference. Frozen meant something was wrong. This was something else entirely. His coffee sat beside his right hand, and he'd lifted it twice, the same measured way both times, set it back in exactly the same place. His left hand rested flat on the open map. His eyes moved, though. That was the thing. His body was a rock, and his eyes were water, slow and reading everything. The prop door, the serving line, the 2 corridor windows above the emergency exit, the new intern who'd walked in and immediately went to her phone. He'd clocked all of it without moving his head more than a degree. Danny found herself standing very still, too, watching him watch the room. Then he reached into his breast pocket. She expected a phone. Everyone reached for a phone. Instead, a small needle appeared between his thumb and forefinger. Threaded already, not improvised. He'd come with it ready. The thread end knotted tight. He turned slightly, angled toward the window light without leaning into it, and found whatever he was looking for on the front of his jacket. The patch. It sat crooked above his left chest. She'd noticed it before, but hadn't been able to read it. Subdued, olive drab on dark background. The colors so close together the design nearly disappeared. He pulled a loose corner thread with 2 fingers, checked the tension, and began stitching with the economy of someone who had done it 10,000 times in bad light. His hands barely moved. The needle went in and came back without any wasted motion. Danny drifted half a step sideways, trying for a better angle. She couldn't read the patch. The insignia was worn, and the embroidery had flattened with age until it was more texture than image. Something circular. Something at the center she couldn't resolve. She tilted her head. The old man's eyes came up without his hands stopping. Not aggressive. Not even particularly curious. Just the flat acknowledgement of a man who had already known she was there and was now confirming she knew he knew. He held the look for exactly 1 second, then went back to his stitching. Danny looked away fast. She pretended to restock the sugar packets. Her face was warm. It wasn't embarrassment exactly. More the feeling of reaching for a door handle and finding it already moving from the other side. Like whatever calculation she'd been running on the old man, he had finished the same calculation on her at least 5 minutes earlier and moved on. He knotted the thread, bit it clean. The needle went back into his breast pocket. Then he turned to the map. His left thumb found the crease along the eastern edge. She could see now it wasn't a fold worn through by accident. The paper had thinned there from years of the same pressure, and he traced it once, slow, north to south. He wasn't checking anything. He was just paying attention to something nobody else in the room could see. Danny stacked the sugar packets without counting them, watching the door and not entirely sure why. Brenda Kowalski came through the side door at 6:41, clipboard first. She was not a bad person. That mattered later. She was a person who had a laminated policy card and a morning checklist and a genuine belief that the rules she enforced made her building run better. She moved through the cafeteria the way people move when they have authority in a small space. Purposeful, chin up, checking tables the way a sergeant checks bunks. The fluorescent lights caught her badge. Civilian Administrative Services. She paused at the coffee station, made a note, moved on. She saw Walter at 6:43. He was in his corner chair, jacket on, map open, both hands wrapped around a white mug. The olive canvas was faded to the color of old grass. The collar was frayed at one edge. The patch above his left chest was visible now. Danny had watched him finish the stitching 10 minutes ago. 3 careful loops and a clean tuck. The needle back in his shirt pocket before anyone else noticed he'd had it out. The patch itself was subdued dark on dark, its design not quite readable from the coffee station. Brenda read it as unauthorized. She crossed the room. "Excuse me." She set the clipboard on the edge of his table. Not asking. Establishing. "I need to bring something to your attention." Walter looked up from the map, one slow look. The kind of look that registers everything in a single frame, her badge, her clipboard, the printed sheet on top, the position of every person within earshot. Then he looked back down. Brenda took that as an invitation to continue. The cafeteria has a posted appearance standard for civilian contractors and visitors. She turned the clipboard so the notice faced him. Outerwear with unofficial insignia isn't permitted unless you have pre-approval from base administration. That would include the patch on your jacket. Silence, not the silence of someone who didn't hear, not the silence of someone composing a protest, the silence of someone sitting inside a frequency only they could receive, deciding whether anything in the room required a response. Brenda filled it. I'm not trying to make this difficult. If you have documentation, a contractor badge, a visitor pass that shows the emblem's been cleared, then we're fine. If not, I'll need you to either remove the jacket or step outside until we can verify. Danny had stopped stacking sugar packets. Two of the junior officers at the center table, both of them had glanced at Walter's corner when they came in. That quick involuntary check people make when they recognize something they can't quite name, were now looking at their trays with deliberate focus. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. One of them, a lieutenant with a planning shop folder on the table beside his coffee, had gone very still in a way that was different from his natural stillness. He knew something. He just wasn't saying it. Walter's thumb moved once across the map, along the crease at the eastern field boundary, the worn-through fold where the paper had gone translucent from years of the same touch. Then his hand stilled again. He did not remove the jacket. He did not reach for documentation. He looked up at Brenda Kowalski a second time, the same unhurried sweep, and his expression held nothing that could be called defiance. No heat behind it, no edge. It was the face of someone who had been asked to justify their presence by people with considerably more authority than a civilian cafeteria administrator in rooms considerably more consequential than this one, and had simply waited them out every single time. Sir, Brenda picked up her clipboard. I'm going to need an answer. The cafeteria hummed. The coffee station dripped. The lieutenant with the planning folder was looking at the wall now. Walter brought the mug to his mouth and drank. Brenda stepped back, not far, 2 feet maybe. But she stepped back. She unclipped the radio from her hip and keyed it with the practiced confidence of someone who had never once doubted that the radio would solve whatever problem stood in front of her. Her thumb hit the button. She asked for the security liaison on duty. Her voice was flat and official and carried just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, which Walter suspected was entirely intentional. He set his mug down. He did not look at her. The planning officers came in through the east entrance, 4 of them, the door swinging wide. Chart tubes under 2 arms and a manila folder held flat against a lieutenant commander's chest like it might escape. They were talking low and fast. The way people talk when the problem hasn't been solved yet and the meeting to solve it is already overdue. The tallest one had a coffee cup from somewhere else. The youngest one was checking his watch against the clock on the wall. Then the youngest one looked up. His eyes found Walter's jacket. Not Walter, the jacket, the patch. He looked away, looked back. Said nothing to the others, but something shifted in his posture. The way a man shifts when he recognizes a name he's heard but never expected to. See attached to a body in a room like this. Danny Okafor saw it. She was 2 tables over with a half-eaten breakfast she hadn't touched in 10 minutes, and she had been watching Walter the same way she'd been watching him for 3 weeks now. The kind of watching you do when something doesn't fit, and you can't explain why, and it bothers you more than it should. She had her phone face down on the table. She didn't reach for it. The planning officers took the long table near the window. Rolled charts landed flat. The folder opened. The lieutenant commander's voice dropped lower. The youngest one glanced at Walter again. Brenda's radio crackled. The liaison was 2 minutes out. She straightened. She had the dress code notice in her left hand still, the edge creasing slightly where her fingers gripped it. She looked at Walter the way people look at a problem that is almost handled. Sir, I want you to understand this is standard policy. This isn't personal. Walter's hands were flat on the table, completely still. I understand, he said. That was all. The lieutenant commander at the window table had unrolled what looked like a coastal chart. His finger moved to a section and stopped. He said something brief and sharp, and the man beside him shook his head once. Not a correction, a problem. The shake of someone confirming bad news they had already suspected. The youngest officer, the one who had looked at the patch, was not looking at the chart. He was looking at the wall to his left, staring at it the way you stare at something when you are actually thinking about something else entirely. Walter turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the table. His thumb found the map's worn crease along the eastern field boundary without him looking down. He traced it once, slowly. Brenda's radio crackled again. Closer now. Outside in the corridor, footsteps, the measured kind. Danny watched Walter's hands. Still. Perfectly still on the table, while every other person in the room was somewhere between uncomfortable and urgent. The coffee station dripped. The fluorescent light above the east entrance hummed at a slightly higher pitch than the others. Walter had probably noticed that the first morning he ever sat here. He pulled the map 1 inch closer to his coffee and smoothed the crease flat with his palm. The footsteps in the corridor slowed, then they stopped. Brenda had found her rhythm again. She'd pulled the printed notice from her clipboard, smoothed it once against her palm, and started reading. Section 4, paragraph 2, which clearly states that all civilian contractors and non-badged visitors to the administrative dining facility must present in professional or work appropriate attire as defined by. The door opened. Not the side door, the main entrance, the one Walter had been watching since 6 o'clock. Brenda didn't notice. She was still looking at her paper. Base Regulation 7-19, which supersedes any prior informal arrangements and applies regardless of. The woman who walked in wore a working khaki uniform, 2 stars on the collar, a cover tucked under her arm. She was already moving at the pace of someone with somewhere to be, a rolling chart tube in one hand and a phone in the other, and she wasn't looking at the cafeteria at all. She was looking at the text she was typing. Then she wasn't. She stopped in the middle of the floor, not gradually, not slowing down and finding a reason to pause. She stopped the way you stop when you see something that doesn't fit any category your brain is currently using, and your brain has to restart. Her eyes were on the jacket, on the patch above the left chest, crooked, faded. The thread that had been restitched this morning, still slightly darker than the surrounding fabric, regardless of frequency of visit or previous accommodation. Mr. Pruitt, I need you to either comply or I'll have to ask the liaison to. Walter. One word. Across the room. Not loud. The cafeteria was not large and the Admiral did not need volume. Brenda's sentence stopped in her mouth. Every junior officer at the 2 center tables stood up. Not on a command, not on a look. They stood the way you stand when something happens that every instinct you have says requires you to be on your feet. Chair legs scraped linoleum in a single uneven chord. One of them knocked a coffee cup and grabbed it without looking down, eyes already forward. Rear Admiral Josephine Tarrant walked across the cafeteria. She didn't walk fast. She didn't walk like she was performing anything. She walked like a woman who has just seen something that needs to be addressed immediately and personally, and there is nothing else in the room worth her attention. She stopped at the corner table. Walter looked up at her. He didn't look surprised. He looked the way he always looked, even measured, one hand resting open on the road map. The Admiral looked at him for a moment, then she said it, quietly enough that it was almost just for the table. But the room was completely silent now, and silence carries. Cold water. The word landed like something physical. Danny Okafor had not moved. She was standing beside the coffee station with a paper cup in both hands, and she watched the Admiral's posture, straight, deliberate, and she watched Walter's face, which did not change, and she watched the officers at the center tables, who had not sat back down. Brenda was holding her clipboard with both hands. The printed notice was still in her right hand, slightly bent where she had been gripping it. She turned to look at the officers standing. She turned back to the corner table. She turned to look at the Admiral. Nobody was looking at her. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Walter said, "Joe," that was all. Just the name. Easy and unhurried, the way you greet someone you have known since before the world knew either of you. The Admiral's expression shifted. Something brief and private moved across it. Recognition. Yes, but something underneath recognition. The look of someone who remembers exactly where they were and what they were writing when they last had reason to say that call sign. Brenda's clipboard lowered, 1 inch, then another. The footsteps in the corridor slowed, then they stopped. The door opened, not fast, not slow. Just the deliberate movement of someone who has walked into rooms that went quiet before and stopped expecting it to feel like anything. Rear Admiral Josephine Tarrant was in her service dress blues, 2 stars on her collar, a leather portfolio under one arm. She had the kind of posture that never quite leaves a person. Spine straight, shoulders back, chin level. She was moving at the pace of someone already late to something important. She was 3 steps into the room when she stopped. Her eyes had gone to the corner, to the frayed olive green jacket, to the crooked patch above the left chest. The room didn't know it had changed yet. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same. The coffee station dripped. Brenda was still holding her clipboard at reading height. The dress code notice extended forward, her voice just now trailing off from the word regulation. Walter, not loud, just clear. The Admiral's voice had the flat carry of someone trained to be heard in wind. Then quieter, the way you say a word that belongs only to a specific file in a specific vault. Coldwater. Brenda's head turned. The junior officers at the center table turned. Danny Okafor, still in her chair, went very still. Walter looked up from the map. His expression didn't change the way relief changes a face, or the way surprise does. It just settled. The same way the room does when a vibration you stop noticing finally goes silent. "Admiral," he said. She crossed the room. The officers at the center table didn't receive an order. They didn't look at each other for confirmation. They simply stood, one after another, the scrape of their chairs a short, ragged percussion against the linoleum, and they did it the way people stand for a flag, not because someone told them to, but because the body understands some things before the mind does. Brenda's arm dropped 2 inches. The clipboard was still in her hand. The notice was still facing outward. Her sentence had simply stopped existing. Admiral Tarrant stopped at the edge of Walter's table. She looked down at the map for a moment. The county roads, the worn crease along the eastern line, the coffee ring on the upper corner that had been there longer than some of these officers had been alive. Then she looked at him. "I wrote part of your citation," she said. 2003, the second one. I was a lieutenant commander at the time, and they handed me 3 paragraphs and told me not to ask where the information came from. She said it matter-of-factly, not performing, just stating the record for the only audience that needed to hear it. Walter was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck moved through the parking lot, its headlights briefly crossing the window and gone. "I remember the citation," he said. It was good writing. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, something older than that. From the center table, one of the officers, the lieutenant commander who'd glanced twice at Walter's patch, who'd known something before anyone else in the room admitted it, was looking at Walter with an expression that could have been recognition or could have been the dawning realization that the gap between what is recorded and what actually happened is sometimes larger than a career. Brenda lowered the clipboard fully. Her hand found the folded dress code notice without looking. Her fingers closed around it. Slowly, without a word, she slid it into her jacket pocket. She did not look at Walter. She did not look at the Admiral. She found a spot on the beige wall somewhere above the coffee station and she stayed there, quiet, in the particular stillness of someone reconsidering every word they have said in the last 15 minutes and finding no good place to land. The junior officers remained standing. One of the junior officers, a lieutenant, maybe 26, collar devices still sharp from the box, was holding a rolled chart like he'd forgotten he had it. His eyes moved from the Admiral to Walter and back again, working out the math, not getting there. Admiral Tarrant said it quietly. "Gentlemen, sit down." They sat. She pulled the chair across from Walter and settled into it without asking. The table was small. 2 coffee cups between them and nothing else except the county road map, still open, the worn crease running along the eastern field boundary like a pale scar. She didn't look at the map. She looked at him. "I heard there was a root problem," Walter said. Not a question. His voice was flat and measured, the particular tone of someone who has not spoken operationally in 16 years and finds it still fits perfectly. The lieutenant glanced at the Admiral. She gave him a single nod, small, the kind that means go ahead and also means I'll explain later. The chart unrolled across the laminate table. Walter's coffee cup held one corner. The lieutenant's thumb held the other. It was a coastal survey. Recent printing, updated contour lines, a red-marked insertion corridor running up from a tidal inlet. Someone had drawn a thick black X across the corridor in grease pencil. Construction survey flagged the approach, the lieutenant said. New drainage infrastructure. It's been published. If we know about it, they know about it. Walter leaned forward. His hands moved across the chart, not quickly, not dramatically, just purposeful, the way a man moves when he already knows where he's going. He traced south of the X, past the inlet, past the secondary channel. His index finger stopped at a narrow break in the contour lines where a small creek fed into a shallow bay. Right there, he said. The lieutenant squinted. There's nothing there. The survey shows a collapsed structure and silting. That whole section reads as non-navigable. At high water, Walter straightened. Low tide window is 4 hours. The mouth clears to 9 feet at the midpoint. You go in on the ebb 2 hours before low slack. Bearing in is 274 magnetic. The hatchery foundation gives you a fixed reference, right abeam to port. He paused. There's a trail on the eastern bank above the weed line. It runs 400 meters before it hits the maintenance road. Somebody cleared it originally for equipment access. It's been overgrown since about 2001, but the grade is there. Nobody moved. The creek mouth won't show on a satellite survey because the silting changes seasonally. Fall and winter, it looks impassable, but it isn't. He sat back. It isn't. The lieutenant was looking at the chart. His pen was in his hand, but he hadn't written anything yet. He looked up. How do you know this? Walter picked up his coffee. Drank. Set the cup down. I know it because I went in that way. The lieutenant opened his mouth. The Admiral put one hand on the chart, flat. Write down what he said. The pen moved. Brenda Kowalski was still standing near the coffee station. She hadn't moved since the Admiral sat down. The clipboard was at her side now, held in both hands, the dress code notice face down against her hip. She was watching the lieutenant's pen move across the margin of the chart, and her expression had the particular quality of someone watching something they do not fully understand but understand enough to know it matters. Walter looked down at the county road map, the crease along the eastern field boundary. His thumb found it without looking, the way it always did, tracing the line between the timber stand and the high pasture where Margaret used to say you could see the whole county if you stood in exactly the right place. He left his thumb there. Danny Okafor was the one who asked. She was young enough that she didn't know not to. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? The cafeteria had gotten quiet in that particular way rooms get when everyone is pretending not to listen. The planning officers were still standing near the chart. Admiral Tarrant had one hand resting on the back of a chair, not sitting, not leaving. Brenda Kowalski had stopped moving entirely. Her clipboard was at her side now, angled slightly inward. The dress code notice nowhere visible. Walter didn't answer right away. His thumb was still on the crease. The eastern field boundary. That thin white line worn clean through the paper where Margaret had traced it so many times the map had just given up holding color there. She used to say, he started, and then he stopped. Cleared his throat once, the way old men do when the words need a moment to find their shape. She used to say the land needed somebody paying attention to it. That was her whole philosophy. Didn't matter if it knew you were watching. Didn't matter if it thanked you. It just needed someone to see it every morning and mean it. He looked up at Danny then. Not long. Just enough. That was the only job description I ever thought was worth keeping. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. The coffee station hummed. Somewhere near the kitchen, a tray slits against a rack. Danny looked down at the map, the crease. The thin, pale line of Margaret's 30-year habit, worn into paper by 2 sets of hands, one of them gone now. Her face didn't change much, but she stopped blinking for a moment. Admiral Tarrant turned toward her quietly. His name doesn't appear in the record, she said, low. Matter of fact, not on the citation, not on the op report, not anywhere you'd find it. She wasn't looking at Walter when she said it. She was looking at Danny. The operation he just briefed doesn't officially exist. The insertion route doesn't officially exist. The reconnaissance that found that creek mouth, she paused. The smallest pause, that doesn't exist either. We had the benefit of that work for 20 years and we never got to say so. Danny looked at Walter. Walter had folded the map back along its original lines, careful, the same way he folded it every morning. East panel first, then the county grid, then the blue crease that marked the farm's western edge. His hands moved without hurry, without any visible weight. "That bother you?" Danny asked. He smoothed the last fold flat with the heel of his hand. Margaret knew, he said. Mostly. He tucked the map into the breast pocket of the olive jacket, the frayed one, the one with the patch still sitting slightly crooked above the left chest. He picked up his coffee cup, looked into it, set it back down. She didn't need to know the specifics. She just knew I was paying attention. The corner of his mouth moved. Said that was enough for her. The Admiral looked at him for a long moment. She didn't speak again. There wasn't anything to add. Across the room, Brenda Kowalski was very still. Her hand had found the fold of her jacket pocket. She wasn't looking at Walter, or at the Admiral, or at anything in particular. Her eyes were somewhere around the middle distance, the way eyes go when a person is doing math they didn't expect to be doing. She didn't move. She didn't leave. Walter's thumb pressed flat against his jacket pocket where the map now rested. The land out there in the gray morning light. 4 miles east, the eastern field boundary, the high pasture where you could see the whole county if you stood exactly right. Someone had always been watching. No one ever had to know. He folded the map the same way he always did, east field boundary first. Then the county road, then the river bend, each crease following the last like a closing argument. He finished the coffee standing up, one long pull, set the cup down clean. Danny said something, soft, he didn't quite catch it. He nodded once anyway. That was enough for both of them. He picked up his jacket from the chair back and pulled it on without looking at the collar. The patch sat crooked above his chest, same as always. Brenda's reserved placard was leaning against the napkin dispenser. White cardstock. Someone had written the word in block letters with a blue marker. He didn't stop, didn't look at Brenda, just moved it 1 inch to the left with 2 fingers as he stepped around the table, the way you'd move a stone out of a field row. No ceremony, no point. He walked past the coffee station, past the door, and out into the early cold. The truck started on the first turn. He set the map on the passenger seat. The worn crease caught the pale morning light the same way it always did. He drove home to the land.